Hello and welcome to the 64th episode of the Accountant's Success Secrets podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Mark Lee of Bookmark Lee. I'm a mentor, speaker and debunker.
And I'm Philippa Haynes of Insight 101, supporting you to stand out. Each week on the podcast, we showcase another experienced accountant or bookkeeper who we think can inspire and encourage other accountants and bookkeepers in practice around the UK.
We both recognise that every accountant and bookkeeper is unique and distinct. They have different backgrounds, experiences and reasons for starting and building their practices.
Yep, so we asked them to share their stories, including the highs, the lows, and what they've learned along the way. We look to explore what makes them different in terms of their background, their successes, their failures, and their focus.
Our aim is to provide some fundamental insights for others like you, our loyal listener. And if you'd like to share your story in a similar way, do please get in touch with Philippa or me. We're now looking for guests for the end of August and into September. Amazing.
I know, it's great. I don't want to think about it because the summer will be over.
Yeah.
Anyway, today in our 50-second interview, we are delighted to introduce Jon Norton, who started his practice, Barefoot Accounting, in 2014. The name was inspired by the Chinese barefoot doctors who made healthcare more accessible. We need to find out about that. Jon had the same goal to make accountancy more accessible and offers bespoke monthly support to business owners as part of a team of 6 from his base near Edinburgh, right up north. Before starting his practice, Jon had worked as a driving instructor, we need to find out about that as well, and a musician before moving into an accountancy practice and then working for a number of businesses after that. He originally trained and qualified with the ACCA, but has chosen for his practice to be regulated by the AAT.
Welcome, Jon. What would you like to add before we get to the interview, or correct for that matter?
Oh, Miney, right. Nothing, thank you. That was brilliant. Yeah, that's a good summary. And I'll try not to go too fanboy. I used to receive Mark's emails once a week, so that was fantastic.
Oh, we'll keep that a nice one.
Thank you. That's so kind.
Okay, just before we start, we must thank the sponsor of our podcast, Pinnacle Global Group, the trusted offshoring partner to over 150 accounting and bookkeeping firms across the UK and Ireland, led by London-based chartered accountant Mayank Pandya. With offices in London and Mumbai and a team of over 300 professionals, Pinnacle provides both compliance resourcing from accountants, bookkeepers and payroll admins to tax and audit associates. Also value-added support, including management accounts, virtual finance controllers, financial analysts, and much, much more. They're GDPR compliant, ISO certified, covered by the professional indemnity insurance, and offer flexible models, full-time, part-time, or pay as you go. You can even start with a trial period or join their sponsored trip to Mumbai to meet the team in person. I still want to do that. So find out more at www.pinnacleoss.co.uk or click the link wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Also supporting the podcast is the Tax Advice Network. Their website enables accountants to choose specific specialist tax advisors for general tax support or for help across any of over 100 areas of tax. It's free to use. You just pay the tax advisor that you choose after agreeing terms with them. Go and take a look at their website, find a taxadvisor.online, where you can also register to get their weekly tax tips, which are written especially for general practitioner accountants.
Great stuff. Right, now back to Jon. As you know, we aim to keep the podcast to around 30 minutes, and we do that by focusing on a few questions.
Yeah, and I'll go first. So let's go back to the start, Jon. How and why did you set up your own accountancy practice? And how did you get your first clients?
Oh, good questions. Just going back in the distance past. I suppose when I moved up to Scotland, I fell into accountancy from working into a factory and doing time and motion and did my old qualifications. Then I went into practice, and then I went into working commercially in various different roles. And I think there's something about practice that I really liked, like being able to help people a little bit more hands-on. I think you can make more of an impact to a small business and really help guide them through it. And I liked that. Unfortunately, while I was working commercial, one of the factories I worked at burnt down, which was a bad day. Did lead to me not having a job, actually. And that's when I really started thinking that maybe I should run my own practice. And I really had hankering for all that and looked into it more. And I think I was pushed there more and more as I was trying to find a replacement job. And I actually found it was very difficult in finance to get a job, because we had, at the time, let's go back a bit, about, third child on the way. My wife's got a career, and that everything was the same. You'd get questions like, oh, well, what happens if there's an issue at 4:30 in the evening? And it'd be like, well, I need to pick my kids up. What are you saying here? And can't someone else look after them? Or, I can pick up my kids and deal with it later. It's not going to be a life or death issue. And there's all this sort of, and it's month end, you can't have a life every month for a week. And you think, well, can't we work smarter? And I just felt that was another push, to be honest, of making a job that was flexible, that I could work around life, support other commitments outside work. Because I think finance can be quite tough in that way.
That's a bit of a theme. Sorry, that's a bit of a theme for you, John, because you were quite flexible in the early days. When you left university and you weren't happy with doing what you were doing, and then going into various jobs and driving. Tell just a quick potted history, because I think it's fascinating, and it just gives you much more. It gives the context that we need for actually now you know what you're doing, but it's been quite a colourful start, hasn't it?
Oh, I'm very flattered. Do you think I know what I'm doing? I don't think any of us do. It's like hindsight's 2020, to quote some philosopher, or Megadeth. I'm not sure which. But basically, when I was at university, I just wasn't really happy what I was doing. I was going to engineering, and I found I was spending a lot of time playing bass. So I thought, oh, hang on, let's go to music college and let's try and make a go of being a professional musician. So I did that, and it was great fun, and it's brilliant stuff. But the problem is, with playing bass, you have to carry around a lot of equipment. So I had to get a car, and then the motorbike had to get sold. And I thought, well, rather than resenting the car for getting rid of the motorbike, I thought, well, maybe I can make this work for me. And then that's where I thought, actually, I could use the car for being a driving instructor. I quite liked, I was a bit of a rev head as well. And so I went down that route. And ironically, it's, let's say, with hindsight 2020, it's been quite helpful, because I know I literally was at the end of January with receipts and everything that I knew I should keep somehow chucked all over the floor. This was really in the olden days of, no cloud accounting software or anything like that, and typing in the figures and sort of adding it all up and then putting it into the online form. So it was quite nice actually getting that, with hindsight, getting the idea of what it's actually like running a business. Because I think sometimes we can sit the other end of the desk and say, well, why aren't you keeping your receipts, and why aren't you keeping them in a nice spreadsheet for us? So that worked quite well. And then from there, I moved up to Scotland and managed to get a job, as I mentioned before, and then went from there into more the accountancy-based thing. I think, I got to 30 and thought, I think I gave myself a timeline. Either I was going to be a rock legend, or I'll think of something else when I get to 30. So I kind of upgraded that, upped the stakes, and became an accountant.
I love that. And I also applaud you for sharing your story about the pressures to try and balance looking after the family with your role, given your wife had a separate career, because too often perhaps we hear about it from the mother's perspective rather than from the father's perspective, and it's sort of this historical assumption that it should always be the mother prioritizing family over work, and that shouldn't be the case anymore. And I love your story showing that it's, that's not the way that you chose to go. I think that's brilliant. And how did you get your first clients, John?
That was quite an interesting one. It's hard to think back to it. It was through networking, like very basic networking events, like meeting up with people who were starting their businesses. I know that's my very first client, because I remember getting my very first client, and then the day afterwards getting a job offer. And you're like, oh, I've got a client. I now actually have a practice. And then got the job offer, and we had a child on the way. And I was like, I'm going to have to take the job, but I'm still running the practice. And it's one of those things, I think people get muddled up with the idea of a side hustle not being, in my mind, it was never a side hustle. It was just, we live in the real world. I think for a lot of businesses, when they start out, they don't have a huge stack of cash to create the business. They've got a day job and they have to balance this on the side. So that was quite a good experience, especially when I kind of can appreciate the challenges that people face. But yeah, I think it was more from that. It's quite funny, actually. I never really went too much into marketing, though this will date it a little bit, because I did get found out by people through Google. I think I was on Yell.com. And at the time, I think I'm fairly confident to say I was the only local accountant with a website. And I found it funny when I looked at marketing, looked at some business networks, and I was saying, oh, your website needs to be like this and like that, and all this, and you need this graphic and everything like that. I'm thinking, I've got a website. That's actually like, it's changed now. And I have to say, even at the time, there were far more experienced accountants out there, but maybe they didn't need to. Actually, I know that some of them didn't need to, because it's word of mouth for a lot of people. And again, for me,
but also your name, the name Barefoot is quite different. Do you get people asking about that? Because there must be a story behind that, apart from, did you say it was doctors or medics or something?
Yeah, I kind of got it. I was thinking of a name. I didn't really want Norton and Associates or whatever. And
Good.
Maybe, where was it? Maybe it's something in the back of your head. You know, when you think I'm going to build something, and you think, actually, I want to build something that's not me or more than me. I think I had a hankering for that. And some of the ideas I had at the start, which touches on with the name, it might only be now that I can feel I can really double down on that. In the beginning, it was a bit harder, but it came from the idea of barefoot doctors. So the idea would be in the paddy fields, some of the workers would be trained in medicine. So if someone got hurt, there would be someone to help them. Whereas I felt in accountancy, and again, this is no slight of anyone's worked for, because this was back in the day, I felt accountants weren't like that. And I think a lot of that was due to technology. Actually, I'm going a bit of a digression here, because it touches onto coaching and stuff, because I think there's that case of, in the olden days, I remember olden days, I mean, that old was it? But, you'd spend a day or two typing a spreadsheet, a bank statement into a spreadsheet, and then you'll do the analysis, and then you could start the accounts. And we live in a very different world. And when you embrace that, that means that, in the past, people couldn't afford to have accounts done, quarterly, let alone monthly, and it would take so long anyway. Whereas now small businesses can actually have accounts provided fairly quickly. I won't say real-time information, because I think it's a misnomer, because someone needs to do the bookkeeping and check it's all okay first. But I think accountancy software has really kind of facilitated that no end.
Yeah. So with that Barefoot Accounting then, and I'm assuming the name means, you sort of walk with everybody, but when you're needed, you've got that additional expertise or whatever. I suspect, is that where it's going from?
The Chinese thing that they were doctors who didn't wear shoes because they're out in the paddy fields.
Right. So keeping it grounded and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's where the idea came from, because I was scratching the names.
So where are you now versus where you thought you would be? So 2014, as you said, the vision wasn't there necessarily, because you were sort of shuttling between a real job and this, but obviously there was a moment where momentum grew. Where are you now a few years on, and looking back, do you think this is totally what I expected it to be, or have you sort of changed? Or
I don't think you can ever say that, to be honest, because I think it's like new levels, new devils sort of things. It's I think as a business grows, because as running a practice, we are business owners, we are developing the business, and in the early days, it was me essentially working on commutes, doing the phone calls during my lunch break, and I remember actually having a baby on my hand, on one, with one arm late at night, laptop with the other hand, doing a business plan for someone. It's crazy.
Love that.
And you're trying to do what you can to build something. It grows to a point where I was actually very fortunate, because again, it's not any great plan of my making. But when I spoke to my boss and said, like, I'm going to hand in my notice now, this is what I've been doing. And he was like, oh, congrats, you're absolutely fantastic. It's fantastic all the way long. But he's like, oh, that's absolutely brilliant. He's saying, I'll tell you what, don't hand in your notice. I'm going to speak to the boss, because you might be able to do work part-time. And so that way I was able to say, right, I'm working a couple of days on my business, 3 days here. So that helped bridge the gap until I finally resigned. And I think you just fumble along. I used to work in this office, but I used to work in the front room of my house. And then you kind of get everyone deliveries, it's chaos, So then I converted a room in the garage. And now I've moved out to an office, and then, there's a team sort of grows. And it seems to be everything's the next logical step. I think for me, the challenge is just recognizing where maybe you hit almost a barrier, and that's often yourself. So for me, my main challenge is probably going into more of a leadership role. I was talking to a business coach about this because he's got 2 courses, one for solopreneurs and one for leaders.
Yeah.
And he was saying, about this turnover. And I was like, that's so funny you should say that, because that's precisely what I'm understanding is like, there seems to be this point where, you're a person running a business, you're creating this new business. And then there's a point where, no, actually now you're leading a team of people to do the work. And there's things like that. And also, I was thinking this morning, this is a complete tangent, but the idea of notional pay, I don't know, this is stolen from other people, greater minds than mine. A lot of people run a business and they might be taking themselves out the normal salary and the dividends, and they might be taking out 30K, but maybe it would actually take them 50K to replace themselves. And you think, well, you've actually just made yourself a job. If you want a business, you need to at least be earning 50K that you're taking out yourself, because then you could replace yourself. And there's all these little challenges that keep dripping up, and you keep learning all the time.
Love that. That's a great example. So where are you at now then? Because you've got 6 people, you've got 3 guitars, as I can see, unless you've got more in the background.
No, there's loads. I got into building them as well from sort of like broken bits and stuff. So that's keeps me busy, keeps me creative and onto other things. I think for me, some of the challenges is making things scalable, and some of the challenges are working out who you best serve and who you don't serve. And those challenges, like there's people you can help, but doesn't mean
tell us a bit about that. Tell us a bit like that. That's interesting. Sorry, we're asking you really difficult questions, but you're managing. You're sort of naturally segueing into what we want to ask you anyway.
Well, I'm trying to say something. I'm rambling on a bit. Hopefully, it'll be useful.
No, you're not. It's great.
Or whatever. I think. One challenge recently was we lost one of our biggest clients, but not in a bad way. It's just kind of, for example, they got a new CEO in, so with that comes more questions, and you just look at the point that I'm having an open conversation is that, he'll ask for something. I'll say, we can have it in a couple of days, whereas he probably means a couple of hours, just don't have the bandwidth. So, it's all very amicable. He's moved on to a bigger accountancy firm, which makes sense because they've got the power to do that. And then you sit back and think, well, what were the warning signs? Where do we stop? And you start thinking, well, if something's got a monthly deadline, we can do that. If they want monthly bookkeeping, we can do that, and we can actually over deliver. And if there's someone's ill, January was quite an interesting one for me because one of our kids had appendicitis and stuff. So it's like, this is life. This happens, and you have to roll with it. So it allows you that scope, or if someone's ill, whatever, you don't have to be, oh my God, how are we going to hit the deadlines? Whereas I was falling into that trap of doing weekly reports, and I think there is no scope. If I'm away for a week, I haven't quite had the time to train someone else to take care of it, if you know what I mean. So it's like, it's not scalable. Whereas if you think, well, let's back off a bit, be really clear. If you want monthly reports, we will do that, and we can deliver that. If you want anything more than that, we aren't going to be able to cope with that for you. And I think it's giving you that headroom to grow and then scale up, because you've got to then train your team up so there's more people, because I'm getting very much into that sort of a whole adage of like, one is none. If there's only one person in the business that can do something, you've got major problems or too much pressure on that one person.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I like
but
that.
when you start out, there's only one person. So it's kind of like, it's a hard gig.
And there's that constant challenge of when you start as a sole practitioner, do you bring somebody on board and it is a hit to your bottom line, or do you try and bring somebody on board at the same rate that you're bringing the new fees on, so that there's an improvement to your bottom line because you're generating more than it's costing from new fees? How did you manage that? Do you remember?
It's a bit of a leap of faith. I was quite fortunate because the first person I took on, she was on a 0 hours contract, because I was quite open about the fact that this is where I am. And I have a mixed view of the 0 hours contracts. I know they get a lot of stick, and I think they are open for people to be exploited, and I'm definitely not about that. But if it's a case of, for a small business, saying, you know what, I don't have enough. If
Yeah.
I, almost like you would have to making huge profit margins in order to say, oh, I can just double the workforce overnight and just absorb it. That's just not realistic. But I think it does allow you that scope to grow. It's quite funny, actually, as a business has grown, I've still got people on 0 hours contracts because I've given the option of what do you want to do. And they're like, actually, I quite like the flexibility. And they're like, well, okay, great, let's do it. It works.
So you've talked about capacity issues then when choosing a client or recognizing they're the right fit for you. Is there anything else about them that you've noticed that you go for the same type of business? I'm talking kind of niche now, or specific types of people, or, certain sector. It may not be, but it's just interesting.
It's I wish I knew the answer to that. I really do. I mean, it's a challenge I'm finding, because there are occasionally, fortunately it's very rare, but where you take someone on and you just suddenly find that they are a bad fit for you and your practice. You can try and be as open about, this is how we work. And let's face it, both parties want it to work. But sometimes I do feel that it might be something, maybe it's just, I can tell I'm stalling a bit, because that is something I'm really challenging myself on. And whether it's just being really clear on, again, we can do monthly reports, don't ask for things weekly, or we can't turn things around quicker than this, is quite a good way of saying, well, that's where you need to go somewhere else. And actually looking at current clients when the client grows, because it's quite nice taking someone up when they're first, they're thinking of an idea, doing the business plan, or you take them as a sole trader and, it's bank statements and then their software and then they're kind of, limited, VAT registered, and you see them grow. It's absolutely wonderful. And there's that point of saying, well, this is where you need to maybe find someone who's got a bit more, take someone in-house or find someone who's got a bit more bandwidth. I think that's an interesting one. But sometimes there is a personality thing or something, or maybe it's like, people want to work a certain way and your approach is slightly different. And I think to me, that's a beautiful thing, because all accountants are different, but it's just trying to make sure that, how do you filter someone? Because they might have heard from someone else that you're really good. And you could say, yeah, I work really well with that person, really help them. It's a brilliant relationship. It works perfectly, yet it might not quite work for someone else.
What sort of style then? How would you describe your personality? Or if somebody else were to describe you, what would you say? What would they say? And by the way, Max loves your guitars. He's saying hi. Max Wotton.
Oh, man with taste. It's very hard to know what other people say about me. I think sometimes I'm quite laid back. I think some people think of accountants as being very sort of like, and I've heard that of being very pedantic and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit chilled out, which I quite like, because it allows me to take a look at the bigger picture. I've got people who work for me who are so eagle-eyed, it's scary. They'll read a document and they'll spot that should be a full stop rather than a comma and everything. And that's brilliant. And again, it's that leadership and make sure people are in the right roles. I guess I've always been a little bit more chilled out with it all. I'm more interested in the sort of like the human interface with the accounts and how they relate to the finances. That's just the way I am. And I think sometimes maybe people don't like that more chilled out approach. And it's almost like, oh, should that be there or there? And you think it doesn't really matter. You spend so much per quarter on your expenses. So let's have a holistic view of what you're doing and how your business is working. And I've kind of come up with a bit of a simple business model to look at a business like on the back of an envelope, because I feel that helps a business owner better than necessarily worrying about this, that, or, if I put my logo on my underpants, is it tax deductible? It's like, that shouldn't be driving your business.
No,
or maybe it should. It depends what line you're in.
100%. And funnily enough, it works the other way around as well. One of my mentoring clients was very upset at the increases in software costs recently that he was absorbing for his clients. And he decided he was no longer going to absorb them. And I said, that's fine for your new clients, where you'll sort of show the software cost separate to your fees. He said, well, so I need to talk to my existing clients about a fee increase to cover the increased software costs. And without betraying any confidences, this is somebody whose clients were on average paying between £2,000 and £5,000 a year. And he was talking about an extra 20 or 30 quid. And I said, that's not a conversation you're going to have with any of your existing clients, because whilst it all adds up to you from their perspective. Yeah, you don't want to be having conversations with them about 20 or 30 quid.
That looks very picky, doesn't it? It just doesn't sit right, does it?
I understood where he was coming from, and when we talked it through, he realised that it didn't make any sense either. But it's very easy to get stuck into the weeds.
It's funny actually when you're saying that, because you asked me earlier, like, what's the difference now with where it was in the past. The software is a good one. I mean, yeah, there's all the way things have changed at the moment and the costs going up. But when I first started, there were so many solutions. I did something that, probably not advised for any client, but I changed my own accounting software every couple of months just to get a feel for what they would like to use. Yeah, I am a complete lunatic. But, it was like I could actually, when people said what things were like, I could give them an appraisal and this is how they were like to use.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I think there's only 2 products I wouldn't touch with a barge pole.
Well, let's not mention them, but do share your preferred one, the one that you use for your practice.
Well, actually, I'll come back to that one. My point was, with using these ones, I used to think, well, what was the best one for the clients? And then sort of looking at, this one's slightly cheaper and this one's a bit more expensive. Whereas now it's like, it comes down to more scalability.
Yeah.
It's like, people pick their best solution and they go with it. And also, whether it's an extra quid or a bit less, you start thinking this starts getting a bit silly now, because you're like really spitting on the edges. And if someone really is that kind of worried about cost, well, maybe they should be thinking of other options, which are out there. But as for the software I use, my main weapon of choice is QuickBooks, though I do have quite a few clients on Xero. And I do like Free Agent for people, especially when they want to do the work themselves. When you get that small business and they're like, I don't really need bookkeeping, I don't need that. And I think, it's I like the way from the early days they very doubled down into that one. So I thought that was a good solution.
I think choosing what's right for each client, letting each client, or recommending for each client, is a very good approach. And equally, there's nothing wrong with those accountants who say, this is my preferred software. We only take on clients who use this software. By the way, it's probably not right for you, so we're not the right accountants for you. And I know some firms that operate that way. It's amazing how quickly time flies. We're interviewing somebody as interesting and as eloquent as you, John. Should we just sort of finish the questions with the big mistakes that you've made and how you learned from them and corrected them?
Oh, geez. That's a hard one. I feel I'm always making mistakes and trying to learn from them, to be honest. Nothing catastrophic. I think some mistakes, and I think with hiring people, that can be a mistake if you get the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like probably getting the wrong client, but even more impactful. I think part of my problem was at the start is working remotely made it very hard to be on hand to spot problems earlier on, which didn't really help anyone in a way. I think a big mistake would be getting onto these things sooner. But I think that's part of, if I'm honest, as part of the moving into leadership role, now it's quite nice. I've kind of partnered with organizations now to try and help youngsters, help provide work experience. And that's actually a great way of learning, because you get a work experience guy, you give them something to do, and they're quickly back saying, I've done it. And you think, you have to factor in, when am I going to review what they've done so it actually is a benefit, rather than just someone ticking through this list and then, a year down the line, you then go through this list and go, oh my God, they've only half done it all. Whereas they don't learn that thing and it doesn't help you. So I think it's that's probably the biggest mistake, is just like trying to build in a bit of extra time to do things. But then I don't know who's listening. If you're a solopreneur or you've just taken on your first hire, it's very easy for me to say, yes, just cut in a bit of time to do this and the other. But when you're doing everything, you can't. I'm fortunate I've got a bigger team now that they free me up to have the time to look at more the business development and start looking at, how are we doing things and how do we, almost like the tide to raise all boats sort of thing.
Yeah. I love that.
Mark, I mean, I think we're both, we could really sort of talk for a long time because there's so much to get through here. But what have you picked up in the conversation that we've had over the last 30 minutes? What has kind of struck you?
Well, I very much like and admire John's pragmatic approach, and sort of growth mindset that's quite clear from everything he's talked about, and his honesty in terms of looking after staff and having 0-hour contracts that work for both him and for the staff without anybody feeling exploited. And I tend to hope, plus assume, that the staff and the team would echo that. What about you, Philippa?
Yeah, well, I guess I've been thinking as we've gone along, but what strikes me is that the way that you work or your career progression has been very organic. It's been sort of windy, but actually that doesn't mean that you haven't been thinking all the time. You know, everything that you've done, you've made a connection and thought, oh, that's made a lot of sense, I should be doing that, or, you know, in order to create this, I should be doing that. And also, when you've got into practice, you've been doing trial and error and finding out about software and, you know, zigging and zagging, but you've done that so that you have an insight into something, so you can give really good counsel to your clients. So
Yeah,
it's that beautiful mix of being organic and open for kind of exploration, but then being razor sharp in your thinking as well. I love it. It's really
really does
powerful.
come across. Yeah, John. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think, you know, it's funny you put it like that, but I suppose all you can do is worry about your next step. That's all you can do.
Well, if I can, I'd say focus on your next step rather than worry. I'm not a great fan of encouraging anybody to worry about things, but I know what you mean. John, it's been fabulous talking with you today and hearing your story there. If any of our listeners want to find out more about you and Barefoot Accounting, what's the best way for them to do that?
The website's barefootaccounting.co.uk, and they could email me at Jon at barefootaccounting.co.uk, or look me up on LinkedIn.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And Philippa, how can the listeners find out more about you and Insight 101?
Yeah, I guess what we should say is we're going to ask Jon another question. We're going to keep this interview going, but offline. So that we find out a little bit.
I've put that in at the end, but go on.
Oh, no, sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, so we shall be saying goodbye in a minute, but we won't be saying goodbye, but more of that later. Anyway, so I support accountants, bookkeepers to stand out. And just listening to Jon, I think you can understand, you know, what we've pulled out is he's really kind of different. There's a way of working there. He's organically moved there and he's made decisions. Now, not all of us can do that, you know. Not all of us can sort of move through in that way and have something unique about them. That's what I work on, and I'm introducing a new kind of angle to my work, which is
sounds terrific. I'm really fascinated by this.
Yeah, it's called Brand with Me, and it's incorporating AI into what we're doing. So it's human, but with AI as well. And that's because, you know, it's here, it's not going away. We all need to embrace it and think about how we can use it best. And certainly for me, how can my clients and my prospects stand out and sound different, but also use AI for all of that functionality that comes? So watch this space. I will be talking about it a bit more. Anyway, so Mark, tell us a little bit. Oh, I probably need to give my details, don't I? I'm on LinkedIn, and also my website is insight101.co.uk. You can find me there.
And I'm on LinkedIn as Bookmark Lee or Mark Lee FCA. My business card is a bookmark because everywhere online I'm Bookmark Lee. That's my website too. And one thing I've learned from working with accountants generally is that running your own practice isn't easy. Many feel quite isolated. And if you'd like things to feel easier, better, or more on your terms, that's exactly where I come in. Whether it's better clients, fewer headaches, or more profit, I'm always happy to chat. No strings attached. Jon very kindly said something about being a bit of a fanboy, being on the podcast today, having been getting my emails every week for some years. And I tend to hear from accountants who are surprised that I am genuinely approachable. Perhaps it may be assumed otherwise. Anyway, some of the ad hoc conversations lead on to regular one-to-one working, particularly with practices that are looking to grow, or you might decide to join the Sole Practice Club and to share and learn with other sole practitioners, maybe with staff, maybe without, but nobody else has anybody else to talk about the business with. Or we might agree that one chat is all you needed. In any event, also encourage you to reach out, connect with both Philippa and me on LinkedIn, and do please follow the podcast pages on LinkedIn and on Facebook.
Yeah, sadly, that's all we have today. Well, live anyway.
Live,
Thank you, Jon. Live.
yeah.
Thank you, Jon. It's been fantastic. And don't go away, because we're going to ask you that one last question for that real insight. So
I'm intrigued.
yeah, thanks again to the sponsor of the podcast, Pinnacle Global Group, your trusted outsourcing partner. Do check out their website and let their CEO, Mayank, know that you heard about Pinnacle Global on the Accountant Success Secrets podcast.
And thanks to the Tax Advice Network, the easiest way for accountants to reach specialist tax advisors. Remember, there's no charge for using the website findataxadvisor.online, where you can also access their weekly tax tips written especially for general practitioner accountants.
Yep. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share the love online, subscribe and leave a review on Apple, Spotify or YouTube, or let us have your feedback directly. It all helps to broaden the reach of the podcast. Do also please contact either Mark or me if you would like to be interviewed on a future podcast.
Thanks, Philippa. Thanks also to our wonderful guest, Jon Norton. There'll be another episode of the Accountant Success Secrets next week, when our next guest will be Noel Guilford. Before then, we're hoping to secure subscribers on Patreon. So we're going to stay online now to get further insights from Jon, and these will only be available to our Patreons. You know, when I first came across Patreon, I thought I heard podcast people mispronouncing patrons, but I have learned that it is a thing. Anyway, we're hoping we can make that work. And we'll obviously tell you listeners about it once it's all set up properly. So until next week or anywhere else we might meet online or in real life, bye-bye for now.
Bye.